Hello, and you're very welcome to the Irish NFL Show. My name is Shane Brennan, and sitting across from me is Colum Cronin. I'm very we want to welcome you all to today's Stephen's Day festive special. To all who celebrate, we hope you all had a Merry Christmas, and what a festive slate we had on Saturday. It was led off by Rudolph, naturally, as the Steelers managed to bag out a win. On Sunday, we had the Detroit Lions getting a fantastic Christmas present as they won for their division for the first time in 30 years. And yesterday, we saw the Patrick Mahomes gift the Raiders a couple of quite easy touchdowns as the Raiders managed to knock the Chiefs back a peg. There was also no L for Lamar as the Ravens defeated the Niners. The Cowboys fell in what some dubbed as the Fraud Bowl as the Dolphins won that. And of course, we'll probably get to the small matter of the Patriots and the Broncos at some point. But to everybody who I hope Santa was good, I hope plenty of NFL themed gifts under trees this year. I had some Patriots pajamas that I'm currently sporting at the moment. But on the field this week, Colin, I think a quite easy starting point, or the big starting point, is what many would felt was the I guess a preview to the Super Bowl as the Ravens played against the 49ers. Both teams coming into this as the number one seed in their conference. And it's quite clear, I think, as to who came out stronger, not only in terms of who is putting their stamp down as the best team of football, but which player is putting themselves down as the best team of football. There's been a lot of arguments about the MVP conversation as to which 49ers player it's going to be, whether it should be Brock Purdy, whether it should be Christian McCaffrey. And I think Lamar Jackson came into Santa Clara last night and said, you know what, I think I'm the MVP. He was slipping and sliding, managed to get out of tackles. I think Kieran, who was on the Twitter last night, saying that trying to tackle Lamar Jackson should be an Olympic sport. That's how difficult it was last night. And on the other side of the ball, Brock Purdy didn't throw a touchdown, but he threw 4 interceptions. And when you're talking about most valuable player caliber, when you're playing against big teams like this, the Ravens shown that for Christmas at least, they are the best team in football.
Yeah, I mean, this was always, I suppose, the one that's been circled for weeks now, Shane. The heavyweights going up against one another, and it went, I think, different to how a lot of people expected. Florio had made his feelings very clear. If people hadn't seen that, he said that the 49ers were going to kick the crap, except he used a different term, out of the Ravens. Well, that is not how this game went at all. What you'd have to say look, the Ravens had a great defensive plan in particular, and we've talked before about Bill Belichick putting young QBs in a blender. Well, that is what the Ravens did. I suppose, look, you've got so many weapons on the 49ers side, you can't stop everyone. And they recognized that there were going to be some explosive plays that they were going to give up. But ultimately, what they wanted to do was put the pressure on Purdy. And no matter who you are, you could be Peyton Manning, you could be Tom Brady. If you feel pressure, it affects you, and you saw it impact on Purdy. And I don't know how many other defenses can do this to the 49ers. The Browns and the Ravens have probably had the blueprint, but does anyone else have the talent to do that? Because what you need to do, Shane, is you have to disguise every single thing that you're doing. And what you could see Purdy trying to process. And he is a very good processor, but he was desperately trying to process, and he couldn't figure out what they were doing. And in the interim, you've got these heat-seeking missiles coming at him from all sorts of different angles, and they took advantage of it. Ultimately, 5 interceptions in total. Obviously, look, the Sam Darnold one was kind of a late kind of a heave, but you would have to say that, it's a long, long time since we would have seen what at the time was an MVP frontrunner throw 4 interceptions in a game in late December. I think Purdy is a fantastic QB. Still think he's developing, but I think ultimately you saw the limitations on, his game last night. It's interesting to me, I suppose, Shane. We will come to Lamar, but one of the things I suppose that there's been a lot of discussion about over the past, since last night, is the talk about Kyle Shanahan and the fact that I think that the graphic that went up was 0-37 career record when trailing by 8 or more points in the 8+ points in the fourth quarter. And Mike Sando did a piece about this, and he's now 0-38, and the fact that it's very difficult to win from that, right? But at the same time, since 2017, the Chiefs have done it 6 times, 6 out of 14. The Packers 7 out of 34. The Seahawks, Panthers, and Colts ended up all getting one win. The Colts actually managed to tie a game from a similar situation. The Baltimore, Dallas, and New England, the other teams with wins. And so it's very difficult to win. But the thing that stood out to me is essentially in that sample size of 2017, what you are talking about there are the elite QBs for the most part, unless you're talking one or two. You might get lucky, the bounce of a ball, etc. But you're talking about Mahomes, you're talking about Aaron Rodgers, you're talking about Lamar, you're talking about Brady in the latter years of the Patriots when him and they were the juggernaut, and you're talking about Dallas. So the lack, I suppose, of a top tier QB is, I think, what is the issue for the 49ers there. And look, it's a small sample size. I mean, that could change, in the future. I just thought it was interesting, and it is the 49ers aren't built to play from behind, certainly not 2 scores behind. They don't want to throw it deep constantly. They want to mix in, they want to run the ball. They had a bad day at the office, but I don't think there are too many teams that they're going to face similar to the Ravens. And maybe you want to take the floor to talk about Lamar Jackson.
Well, I think he played a fantastic game. I mean, like that, when you're at home and you're trying to find a way to get a pressure on the quarterback, it's incredibly difficult when someone who just has that athleticism and ability to make sort of dime decisions to come out and duck out of tackles like that. And the protection in Baltimore isn't always the best, so he really needs to have that as part of his arsenal, but also to know when not to do something stupid. I think one of the big differences between what we've seen from Lamar Jackson and what we see sometimes from Josh Allen, for example. Josh Allen had something similar for the Bills this weekend, where he got given time to come out to the right-hand side and try to go for a deep ball and then throwing it in a pick. Lamar Jackson, I don't think, is the type of person to do that. I think he's a bit more calm, reserved. He knows exactly what his players can do. He's got a good thing going with Zay Flowers. He is an excellent player, and I saw him play, or fortunate enough to see him play in Tottenham during the earlier in the season. And although that may not have necessarily been his best game, again, it's very difficult to consistently win and to consistently build form across the NFL. We've seen that with a few teams across the league in the last couple of weeks who might have had good mid-seasons but have managed to fall off a little bit. It's incredibly difficult to keep that going. And when you're playing a good game, you can do things that are explosive. When you come into a place like San Francisco, there's nothing phases you. You get away from defenses. You make your passes good. You don't do anything sloppy. And on the games where you're not at your best, you still manage to keep things going. You find ways to move in your feet. You know exactly how your offense works. And I think the Ravens have really built a solid offensive unit as a team. They know exactly what they're doing with each other. There's no question marks, as we see with the Chiefs, for example, which we'll get onto later on. There's no question marks over the guys. No one's saying, oh, this receiver is terrible. These guys shouldn't be there. The Ravens know exactly what they're doing. On your point about how the Ravens defense played, again, incredibly strong game. Managed to get a safety early on in the game, which was one of the more bizarre plays of the weekend. If you didn't see it, Lamar kind of had to come back into the end zone, pretty much tripped over the referee and had to throw it out, and they called it intentional grounding, which ended up being a safety for San Francisco early on in the game. But in terms of how the Ravens defended the 49ers, you mentioned there how you can't stop everybody in San Francisco, and they recognized that pretty early on. I don't think they necessarily were worried about what Christian McCaffrey could do. They were quite happy to let Christian McCaffrey develop yards in the play, so long as they know that when the ball is in Brock Purdy's hands, they reduce his options as much as possible. Very, very rare do the 49ers go for deep Joe Flacco-esque balls down the sidelines, go for it long. They like to find the receivers somewhere in the 15 to 20 yard mark. And those guys were pretty well covered. There wasn't much space. getting out there. Brock Purdy didn't always have the best options. And sure enough, when they gave it to Christian McCaffrey, he averaged, I believe, 7 yards per carry, managed to run for over 100 yards. They were quite okay to let them use that weapon. But the Ravens defense knew how to keep Brock Purdy quiet. And in the end, now we're sitting in a position where in the NFC, San Francisco, Philadelphia, and Detroit are all on 11-4. Now, San Francisco are still the number one seed in that, thanks to their superior record in the conference.
The tiebreakers and whatnot. And the other piece, just briefly on while we're still on this, Jane, just like the 49ers again, when you play Lamar, I think there are a couple of things to it, right? He doesn't tend to lose to the NFC, right? Because it's very difficult to game plan for Lamar. There aren't QBs like him. He is different. I mean, people want to talk about Vic and others. We've never seen anything quite like Lamar Jackson. And you saw it again, if people go back or you watched it or you even see highlights. Watch the way in which the 49ers linebackers constantly are on alert to the threat of Lamar running. It doesn't even have to be Lamar running. It's the threat of Lamar running. And that left so much space. And they won't face too many QBs like that. But I wonder, will other teams be able to look at it and be able to perhaps try to take advantage of some of what the Ravens have done? But the Ravens personnel group is so good that, it will be very difficult for others to do it. The other thing that jumps out to me, I suppose, just on Lamar is the fact that this, again, we talked about it on the show over recent weeks, but nobody decided to at least make life difficult for the Ravens to make the offer. Like, so many teams came out so quickly. Was that the owners not wanting to, give player power? It's certainly very interesting. And while, the Ravens have been really good about putting competitive teams together year in, year out, at other points, like, look at what when they finally really bought into Lamar and really put weapons around him and leaned into his strengths. He is a phenomenal player. He is the front runner currently for MVP, though we've seen that change. I mean, I think you can make certainly a very good argument for Lamar. I still think you can make a very good argument for Christian McCaffrey, and I think you make an argument for Josh Allen, even though the Bills don't have the record of the other two. But I think it's players who constantly cause the opposition to have to game plan against them, and so I think, yeah, the Ravens deserve some flowers for finally getting it done with Lamar, and they're reaping the benefits of that now. But they allowed him to be in a situation where, he requested a trade at one point in the offseason. How do you allow a player like him, to be in that situation? That to me is a little bit silly.
Yeah, and fingers crossed, maybe. Now that I think obviously the big question mark in the offseason was Lamar's injury record. Of course, so far this season, he hasn't had any knock. He's been able to play, I believe, every snap that the Ravens have had, or he hasn't had any games off. And fingers crossed, for the sake of talent in the league, he still manages to have more time. The only thing I will say about the Ravens, though, is I worry from their point of view as to whether or not they are vulnerable to late comebacks. There are some teams that are more suited to striking back late in the game than others. The 49ers aren't a team like that, as you spelled out earlier. But we saw the Cleveland Browns a few weeks ago, the week of the Frankfurt game, that the Cleveland Browns were 2 scores down and still managed to come out and eke a 1-point win. It is possible that, depending on who the Ravens play against, if it's somebody who has greater recognition or knows the team a little bit better, if they find a way to come out and turn things around late in the half, because a lot of the Ravens' strength comes from the way that they're managed to get scores early in the game, to get control and domination early in the game. And we saw that in Santa Clara, and they did relatively well, or impressively well, I must say. And then moving on from what happened last night in Santa Clara, we're going to move on to what happened between the Las Vegas Raiders and the Kansas City Chiefs. And before we're talking about Las Vegas, I want to make sure anybody who wishes to have a bet over the next while, make sure you check out promotions from our partners, quinbet.com, or look at quinbet.com/promotions over the coming NFL weekends. One thing I definitely would not have bet on is how quickly the Patrick Mahomes managed to gift the game to the Raiders early in the half. There was, for those who didn't see, 2 plays, one which is a fumble that was recovered sort of maybe 15, 20 yards away from the Chiefs' own end zone that was brought in for a touchdown. And then the next snap that the Chiefs had, thrown to the corner, picked off by the cornerback, and brought back for a touchdown. And all of a sudden, the Chiefs, in a game that was a little bit scrappy against their most hated rivals in the Raiders, managed to completely lose control of the game. But as much as we can talk about that, and that was obviously something that we've come not to expect from Patrick Mahomes, who's generally quite happy or quite tidy with the ball, and although he's explosive, manages to find a way to move things up. The focus really needs to be on how the Chiefs still managed to only score 14 points. There was a lot of times in the game where their offense could not get firing. There was later on in the game when they got to the end zone, there was a 3rd and goal and 4th and goal from about 5 yards out. 2 passes thrown in the direction of Rashid Rice, who just could not get separation. The Raiders, to their credit, managed to defend them closely enough, so he didn't really have room. But again, you can talk about having the fantastic play design of Andy Reid. You can talk about having the best quarterback in the league, or the face of the league in Patrick Mahomes. But there just isn't enough offensive talent on the Chiefs side of the ball. And as much as the defense has improved, there isn't enough offensive talent in the Chiefs to go and win a Super Bowl this year, I don't think.
Yeah, like I suppose everyone's been given the Chiefs the benefit of the doubt, Shane, for weeks at this point, right? And the expectation, because they haven't played well, particularly since that loss to the Broncos, after the 17 times. But eventually, that changed things. And even before that, it didn't look good, but particularly since then, we have seen the frustration that Mahomes has had. And one of the things that I thought that was interesting that Andrew Brandt had quote tweeted and pointed out was that Jordan Love has more touchdowns and fewer interceptions than Patrick Mahomes. And so we are all talking about Mahomes's wide receiver room, but it's not like the Packers are absolutely stacked at experienced wide receivers or tight ends. But I think this is not like Mahomes looks mortal this year. I still think he's playing very well. He's desperately trying to make things happen. You saw him on the sidelines yesterday with the O-line. But I think the Chiefs need to really go back and look at what happened this year. Because I think from a coaching perspective, it's been a real issue as well. And this is where the coordinator piece can be really difficult to ascertain how much influence the coordinator has been having, because when we talked to Matt Derrick in the off season, he talked about, I suppose, how Andy Reid, was obviously a huge fan of Matt Nagy. And while they were sad to see Eric Bieniemy moved on, they believe now Nagy will be able to step up. And that hasn't happened at all. And so you begin to wonder, not necessarily that Bieniemy was the absolute key component to it, right? But sometimes you can be the right cog in the right system. And that, I think, is an interesting piece. And obviously there's desire to want to be the person in charge. But sometimes when things are humming, and it works because people work in different ways. Like, you go back, I suppose, to the way in which, Belichick and Josh McDaniels kind of worked kind of really well together. And then McDaniels went out on his own. It doesn't work. And you saw the same with Ferguson. So many years, like so many of Ferguson's assistants didn't go on to be great coaches, but they worked well with him because they dovetailed quite nicely. And I think there's deeper issues. Like nothing is really working for the Chiefs right now. And while they have Patrick Mahomes, and he was absolutely scrambling. I haven't seen it, but I would love to see the stats from last night, because it was very reminiscent of the Super Bowl that they lost to the Bucs, and the fact that they had, he was absolutely running for his life that night in the Super Bowl. He had crazy stats in terms of what he ran, and that was similar. You can see there is a lack of trust there amongst him and his receivers. And when you have a lack of trust, that begins to erode everything. I don't think there is an easy fix to it in any way, shape, or form. And have seen, people kind of talk about it. Matt Verderam, who has been on this show, and is I suppose a Chiefs fan at heart, said, his concern was like if the Chiefs had to face off against that Ravens defense, how would they score points? People are going to point to Travis Kelce and the Taylor Swift thing as an off-field distraction. I think it's more likely that he's 34-year-old tight end. Top level production tends to fall off at some point. He was very good for a long time, but he can't be the focal point of the attack. And teams know now, with the lack of alternate talent in the wide receiving room, you can double team Kelce, and as long as you take him out of the game, they don't have anyone else. And Mahomes can, he can only do so much, but for that period from kind of 2018 up until last year, Shane. So what are we talking? 5 years certainly, where Mahomes was untouchable. Like everything, it was King Midas. This year, you're seeing the frustration. I think the rest of the AFC West should kick themselves because this is a down year, and ultimately, even in a down year, it looks like the Chiefs are going to win the AFC West.
Yeah, a couple of things I think of the way that some of the Chiefs players have been acting. I mean, every time the thing is going to go wrong, the sideline, there's a lot of frustration being vented. We saw a couple of weeks ago when the Chiefs played the Bills, Patrick Mahomes, when he's hugging Josh Allen, having that kind of moan. And we saw on Christmas Day, Travis Kelce being very frustrated on the sidelines. It seems like there is just a lot of bubbling anger within that camp. And I don't know how deep that goes. I don't exactly know what it is that's causing it. I can't imagine it's just a loss in the field. When you have a fantastic head coach, when you have players who have been in a position for a long time, when leadership comes in, is to calm people down and get people focused. What it seems to be is just a lot of vented frustration and anger that we haven't really seen from many other teams across the league. When there are teams across the league that are good enough that probably should be winning more games, the Cowboys probably being one of them. You don't see that level of just sheer anger coming off, like what we've seen a couple of times from Patrick Mahomes. So I just don't know whether there is just, from a human being perspective, whether there is something just not gelling properly among the Chiefs offense. Obviously, I think the frustrations around not having, or around the skill and quality of wide receivers probably reflects on that. The fact that people, as you mentioned, there are probably targeting, I'm going to say Taylor Swift, Travis Kelce, and make sure he's well marked, is probably adding to his own frustration that they're not obviously hitting their own top standards that they set over the last few years, of course, that they set last season when they won the Super Bowl. And it just seems like that they haven't quite found a way to properly grasp that, take control of that, other than building a siege mentality, which works for some teams, doesn't work for everybody. So I'm just not quite sure how the mentality, whether there's any mentality monsters within that Chiefs dressing room that's properly getting people to calm down and focus. It seems very, very anger based. I'm not quite sure how you look at it. And just regarding the Raiders, before we move on, I think there's a lot of talk about the head coach there. The Raiders have managed to build back up to a 7-8 record. Like you said, there is probably enough talent on that team that if it was coached properly, probably could have chased the Chiefs a bit more to top the division, which I think could be said of all of the AFC West. I mean, we all expected more from the Chargers this season. The Broncos, if they play like they did in mid-season, probably could have really pressed things on. And the Raiders now, we're not quite sure what their future looks like, but they seem to be moving somewhat in the right direction. Do you foresee the way things have been going in Las Vegas continuing in terms of the coaching and the players that they have, or are we expecting the team to sort of clean house, almost like we're somewhat expecting from teams such as Washington or even in the coaching room, the Los Angeles Chargers?
I think it's always difficult to know with Mark Davis, but I wonder, Shane, if they have learned lessons from what happened just a few years ago, because when the last time we saw this with the Raiders, they decided to move on from a head coach, and ultimately, I think they came to regret that they went for the big name. And when Stephen O'Rourke was on with me previously, we talked about that a little bit, about how Mark Davis had said, like, and even before interviews took place, he had settled on his head coaching decisions, which should probably set alarm bells ringing, across the league. But anyway, but you can see that they play for him, and there are things that they need to figure out. And I suppose what you'd wonder is, like, look, in Patrick Graham, they have an incredible defensive coordinator, but is he going to remain there? Is he going to get a job elsewhere? They won yesterday, despite the fact, that
they scored nothing on offense. Well, a couple of field goals, 2 defensive touchdowns that were gifted to them, but they still managed to get it done. So, gotta give them that.
Like the quarterback, faking, the snap was probably his best moment, which is quite something. But they're playing for him. Like, this is a team, and I suppose it's trying to figure out, because I know from the Josh McDaniels experience in Denver, it was horrific. It was awful. Players hated him. They genuinely hated him as a head coach, and they felt that he didn't have their best interests at heart. So obviously, you sometimes see, a new head coach comes in and there's a bounce for a little bit of time. That's not the case in this instance. The bounce has been ongoing and ongoing and ongoing. Now, is that enough? But if you take that away from this Raiders team, you're asking players, I suppose, to buy into yet another head coach, and I think that could be difficult. I wonder if it's worthwhile, giving Antonio Pierce the next season. You maybe not talking a huge kind of contract, but ultimately it's almost like a franchise tag for a coach, right? You want to prove it year before you kind of go long term, because you want to see, what is the offensive philosophy. Like, yeah, they got the win yesterday, but it was in terms of exploiting the Chiefs' turnovers and taking advantage. But they are playing for their coach, and you can see how much it meant to him in the interview after the game. It would be interesting to know. Look, it's Mark Davis, and there's still a bit of time to go, I suppose, on this. So we'll just have to see what happens over the next few weeks. Do you have a view on what way you would approach it?
I'm not quite sure. I mean, I've always said that I've always felt that it's very difficult for someone to come in on an interim basis who's obviously there as an impact. When you're there as an impact coach, as an impact manager, we see this in not just in American football. We see this in the Sam Allardyce type in soccer, or we see this in other areas of different sports across the GA as well. That's a very different thing than it is when you're trying to set up a system and build your franchise towards heading towards the Super Bowl. I think what the Ravens are trying to do with Josh McDaniels was to bring in a culture, reset a system, and build towards something that hopefully that the Raiders, now in the brand new stadium, can bring the Lombardi Trophy. Obviously, that didn't work because they frankly picked the wrong man to lead as a head coach, somebody who was pretty good as a coordinator, not very good in any steps above that. So as much as I think the Raiders are riding high off emotion right now, and the guys are playing well. Obviously, they're there with a backup quarterback. Defensively, they're incredibly strong. I'm not quite sure whether by the time we are sitting here in the offseason, right now everything looks great because week on week they keep playing well. And I know it's difficult to argue against results, but by the time we get to the offseason, I don't know if we're sitting here and being like, okay, what's the actual vision that the Raiders have going at the moment? And I think that's been part of the problem with the Raiders, is sometimes there hasn't been a clear vision, or it's, unlike Mark Davis's choice of hairstyle, there isn't really a clear identity as to what the Raiders football looks like. And I think that's the kind of question that the people need to ask themselves in the Nevada desert in February, March, when they are making a decision. Everything looks all right now. And sure enough, a few of the guys who are there might still be kept on in staff if they manage to keep them. But if you really want a philosophical approach to move forward, maybe there are other people out there that might do a better job. And that's enough, I guess, talking about some of those Christmas Day games. And I'll move back to what happened on Christmas Eve. And wasn't quite a nightmare before Christmas for Nick Mullins and Minnesota. It was 2 touchdowns with 4 interceptions, 411 yards. Incredibly up and down game from Minnesota. But the Vikings, who were very much in the hunt, and if they won that match, they'd still be very much in the hunt for a wild card spot, managing to fall to the Detroit Lions, who, for the first time since 1993, have managed to top their division. In terms of how people have been viewing this up north, I'm not quite sure how people in Minnesota are kind of dealing with this. It's been a very up and down season for them in terms of their quarterback situation, in terms of how they started, and they seem to kind of jump from purple patch to down patch. This was a close game that they could have won. They didn't manage to win it, and Detroit are the better for it. How did you look at the Lions win over the weekend?
I thought it was a huge win for the for Jared Goff to be honest, and for Ben Johnson, because to me, Shane, like, this was a huge test, right? We talked about it on the show the other night in relation to Goff has struggled against pressure. Like, we all know that, and the fact is that Brian Flores brings more pressure than anyone. And yet, Jared Goff and Ben Johnson, who came up with a really good game plan, managed to deal with that. And I thought that was hugely impressive, that they managed to deal so effectively with that. And look, they have gone out of their way to build something there. And Brad Holmes has drafted, and at times they have drafted maybe against the grain a little bit, in terms of what you might expect. But the guys they have drafted have delivered, and I think that is immensely impressive. It is 30 years, you know.
The NFC North didn't even exist back then. It was the NFC Central the last time that the Detroit Lions won it. It's an incredibly long time.
And I don't know if people have seen the video that the Lions put out, like, this was for Brad Holmes and for Dan Campbell. This was always the timeline as they envisaged it, right? They looked at it, and yeah, there have been wobbles. Okay, fine, but you'd have to say that they are the best team in the North this year by far. Now, I suppose, they're not perfect, right? They need more of a pass rush, and we have to see how Goff does this time around in the playoffs. But I do think you have to be seriously impressed by what this team has managed to do, and I would say that they are, like, offensively, they're so fun to watch. In the playoffs, they may well need it to be a shootout, but they are equipped to deal with the shootout. And I think all you can do is doff your cap. The Ben Johnson thing, like, the reports, what he was looking for 15 million, and then his agent kind of denied it. Well, why wouldn't he look for 15 million? He has made their offense one of the most entertaining in the entire league.
Yeah, and as it stands, if the season were to end today, the playoff matchups would be LA Rams at Detroit Lions in the NFC in the first round. And obviously the storylines behind that are endless. And when you're talking about a shootout, that's the kind of game which could very well be a battle of offensive wits. What I worry about with the Lions is we've talked about, or it's talked about a lot on the McAfee show, that whether it's the new Detroit Lions or the old Detroit Lions, I think there are a few franchises that feel like that as soon as the hope starts building up, that some way that managed to find some way to let things lose. And I'm sure that if when a playoff game is played in the Detroit building, I don't know whether that energy around the fans might filter onto the field, that something might slip up, a ball might slip through their hands, a kick might go awry, something like that. And we've seen a couple of times throughout the season where the Lions have been somewhat patchy, but they end up losing to the Bears before kicking the Broncos. They lose a game to the Packers that they probably should not have lost. Yet there's been a couple of quite big statement wins, even going back to the very first week in Arrowhead Stadium. So I just wonder whether there is enough consistency for the Lions to keep moving forward. And as we look ahead, the Lions' next game is against the Dallas Cowboys, and I think the Dallas Cowboys is a great place to move on to next. Uh, the Cowboys playing against the Miami Dolphins on Christmas Eve. It was a battle between two teams who are at the same time fighting for the top seed and also could easily slip and lose out in their own Eastern divisions. And after the Eagles won yesterday, it seems that the Eagles are probably the favorites in the NFC East, and the Dallas Cowboys again found another way to lose. And Cowboys fans are quite worried about the play calling abilities of McCarthy. It was the kind of game where both teams had ways to win and both teams had ways to lose. When you're looking at the Dallas Cowboys now, I'm not sure whether obviously their home record is a hell of a lot better than their away record. There's a lot of fans of teams in the NFC who are wondering whether or not by the time that they get to play the Dallas, whether they have a good chance of winning. I don't know how much you can trust this Cowboys team to come out and put on a good performance. What's probably going to end up happening by the time you get to the playoffs is when they get to the first week, they'll find some way to beat them by 20 points. And by the time they get to the second week, they'll find some way to slip and mess it up. Like on offense, they were patchy as much as the Dolphins weren't always on top of their game either. And now the Cowboys have to face the Lions and have to face the Commanders, which again is a bit of a banana skin game. I'm not quite sure how much we can fully expect from these guys. It's another typical Cowboys season that once they build up momentum, once they find a way to look like they could be contending for a Super Bowl, they'll find some way to let it slip. And this game in Miami was one way that they really let it slip.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, Shane, for me, things got a little bit out of hand with the Cowboys talk, which it very often can. They're a huge market, and you have to take all of these things into consideration when you are, looking at all the stuff that's out there, right? I suppose, but by that I mean the media landscape is now, heavy. It's content dependent, right? I don't know if people have seen that clip of George Santos saying, "You can't make me go away because you can't. You want the content. You all want the content. Everyone wants the Cowboys content, right?" So when the Cowboys are good, everyone hypes them up because they know what this means. People will buy into it so that they can laugh at the Cowboys when things go poorly. And that is how the media landscape is driven. I mean, you have your man and Emmanuel Anacho, who tweeted last night, "We need to have a conversation about Brock Purdy," when literally 4 days ago the man said that he would trust Brock Purdy more than Lamar Jackson. Right? But it's all just about hits. It's all about clicks. It's all about getting it out there. It's never about accountability. We talk about players and coaches taking about accountability. People in the media need to take accountability. You can get stuff wrong. Nobody has a problem with anyone getting anything wrong. Sometimes that happens. As long as, if it's an inherently, held belief. But what you get is you get the hot take merchants out there, and I feel that you get that an awful lot with the Cowboys. I never felt like, to me, it was insane when we were talking about Dak as, MVP. I thought the Cowboys were doing fine, but the Cowboys hadn't played or beaten anyone of note. But instead, it was all Cowboys for Super Bowl, Cowboys MVP, Dak MVP, and everyone wants to give the plaudits because fans of their team tend to be very passionate. There are plenty of Cowboys fans out there, so people say nice things or put it out there, and then go, oh, this is so unexpected. Well, why is it unexpected? We saw the 49ers put an awful beat down on the Cowboys. Mike McCarthy is their head coach. Like, why is this unexpected? Why are we surprised that the Cowboys are where the Cowboys are? No one expected or should have expected, Mike McCarthy to be this, revolutionary coach the second time round. Well, we've seen him for the past couple of years. The Cowboys can be very good on their day, but ultimately their day tends to come at home where everything is right, where the script is run, where the crowd is quiet. When they don't have that, they have looked ordinary. And that is the reality. I still think they can be a good team, but would you put them in the tier of the 49ers? Would you put them in the tier of the really good AFC teams, who I think you have to include the Dolphins within that? I think you have to include the Ravens within that. I don't put them there. And I think that they now, it was interesting, the football GM podcast on The Athletic, in fairness to Randy Mueller, who's a former GM in the league, talked about his piece about the Chargers last week. A few weeks ago, he had done a piece, and he kept saying the Cowboys should get the Dak extension done now. They should get the Dak extension done. They've got this run of games. They're easy enough. They're winning. Dak is playing really well. If they get this done, fans are going to be really happy. Instead, what happens is the Cowboys go on a skid. Like, unless they go on to the Super Bowl, you have to say that's pretty unlikely. The Dak contract is going to come off the back of Cowboys fans feeling frustration. And what's Dak's agent going to look for? Is they going to look for another kind of shorter term deal, 3-4 years, so they can maximize it again? So it's just going to be very interesting to see. But you would have to have concerns for this Cowboys team on the road, and the fact that the Bills in particular have shown a way that you can get at them. And so I think it's not just the offense that is stuttering, it's the defense as well. Like, yeah, Micah Parsons is being held on almost every play. Look, absolutely, Cowboys fans, like, you can see that, but that's a separate issue. That's an officiating issue. But the fact of the matter is that the rest of the defense is not living up to it in a way that you want them to do it. And you could see the way in which the Dolphins were able to exploit that. And I think Mike McDaniel, Shane, deserves immense credit, right? Because they went out, they heard what people were saying, that they hadn't won a big game, and they wanted to put a marker down, and they put a marker down. And you could see the way in which he exploited matchups time and time again in order to get them over the line. And they're dealing with an awful lot of injuries that would be a concern for the Dolphins, but they're finding a way to win. And that game against the Bills in Week 18 could be a cracker.
Yeah, one quick thing on the Cowboys before we move on. I think what they're really missing is the creativity and the ruthlessness to really finish off games. What lives in my memory is when they played Philadelphia in Philadelphia. That was a game the Cowboys should have won. That was a team that was in a position that we could say, okay, we're ready to be Super Bowl champions. They need to go into Philadelphia and get that done. They had every chance to get a touchdown, to get the winning score, and they never were able to do it. I don't think there's actually enough in their playbook to be like, okay, this is what we can bank on. This is something very different that we can bring to the table to do something that no other team is doing, or do something that they maybe wouldn't have done in the first half of the game when things are a bit more choreographed. And I think that's one of the main things that's holding the Cowboys back. And that has to really fall on McCarthy's door. In relation to the Dolphins, before we move on quickly, like I said, I think Mike McDaniel is doing an incredible job. And you have to credit the Dolphins. Every team they've played against where they've needed to beat them, or the teams they've been expected to beat, they've gone on and done it. And this is the first game where they've played against a team that's above 500 and managed to get it done. Doesn't matter there was only about 2 points. Doesn't matter the Cowboys, if things were different, could have got it done. Doesn't matter. They managed to find a way to seal it. And considering how fast things turned around in Miami the last time they were wearing teal against the Tennessee Titans, that is quite a good character development from this Miami team, who I think have a lot of really good players and really good people inside that dressing room. What's really going to be difficult is the fact that they have to play against the Ravens in Baltimore, and then, like you say, in the final week against the Buffalo Bills, which is going to be an absolute cracker. I hope that's put on prime time. Moving on now, just somebody else, or somebody who had an absolutely incredible day, was Amari Cooper, who scored 2 touchdowns, I believe had well over 200 receiving yards, as the Browns managed to go into Houston, and a Houston team which is losing steam with after losing a couple of its top players. CJ Stroud again wasn't playing. The Browns went in there and pretty much cleaned up. The only real strong point from Houston was a Dameon Pierce 99-yard kickoff reception. Other than that, the Browns defense was as strong as we can expect, and the Browns offense with Joe Flacco at the helm throwing some pretty elite passes, it must be said, as much as he ended up throwing interceptions later on in the game. Mind you, one of those interceptions was a sort of shot to nothing Hail Mary at the end of the first half. That is a team which, on paper, people are like, do you know what, we shouldn't really be losing against these guys. But when you come against them, they can find different ways to rip you apart. The defense can find different ways to stop you. And if Amari Cooper has a game like another game like he did, whether it's later on in the season or in the playoffs, it's incredibly difficult to stop him, because not only is he making catches, or quite athletic catches, some long goals, he's getting yards after catch as well, which is also very important for a wide receiver.
Yeah, I mean, I would have to be immensely impressed by the job that Kevin Stefanski and the Browns coaching staff are doing, Shane, because they have a huge number of players who are on injured reserved. And yet with a makeshift offensive line, they have one guy starting on that offensive line who was due to be a starter at the beginning of the season. They have had to bring in a kicker now, because Dustin Hopkins is out. I think there's just so many injuries there, and yet they're going about business. And Flacco is going out there, and Cooper, yeah, I mean, what a game. And again, you could see what it meant to him. But that throw to the sidelines was just ridiculous. I talked about Cortland Sutton having, his own kind of touchdown pass competition. Well, Amari Cooper, in terms of some of the catches that we're seeing recently. Now, it does make you wonder about the whole trade for Deshaun Watson, given what we're seeing Joe Flacco do. But again, Stefanski, as a rookie head coach, he took the Browns to the playoffs, and he is now, considerably grayer than he was. If you have seen any of the photographs of Kevin Stefanski from when he took the job to how he is now, it has taken its toll on him. But they're going out and they're getting it done. And Flacco is staying in there. He's throwing. Yes, he is throwing interceptions. Absolutely, and that is something that in some ways could be a concern. But Dan Orlovsky was on. Was it First Take or recently? And he was talking about, I suppose, about like interceptions and how it gets overblown, because you're going to, if you are playing to win, you're going to put the ball in harm's way occasionally. You're going to trust your receivers enough, and the risk reward, well, it's worth the risk ultimately. And Joe Flacco is doing a lot more, and will be going up against the Jets, who made the decision. I am surprised. I am shocked. It probably is a testament to the banter era that my own team, the Denver Broncos, are possibly still going through. That Joe Flacco looked so lost when he was in Denver. But I certainly did not see this at all in evidence during his time in Denver. And it has since they kind of had the skid against the Broncos and against the Rams, but their past 3 games they have found ways to win. Now that Jets defense is still playing tough, but they are at home, and if they win that, they're in. And this is all in what was widely considered to be, Shane, the toughest division in football, because they're going up against a Ravens team that we're saying are probably the favorite, certainly right now, for the number 1 seed, a Steelers team that's 1-8, and a Bengals team that has 1-8, and yet the Browns are sitting there and they've won 10. I doff my cap. I really do, to the job that the coaching staff have done there. And I think it is, for a long suffering fan base, the fact that they could go back to the playoffs again, despite everything that they have gone through this season, is quite something. I mean, it really is a great story.
And when we talk about that long-suffering fan base, we remember in 2018 that they drafted it in the first round, or the first overall draft pick was Baker Mayfield, who maybe didn't quite light things up in Cleveland, but right now in Tampa Bay is playing absolutely incredibly. He is the Buccaneers have now won 4 games in a row. In that period, Baker Mayfield has thrown 9 touchdowns and just 1 interception. And I was watching Scott Pioli talk to, I believe it was Good Morning Football, and he was basically saying that when it comes to the players like this, what what can be the difference, what can make somebody play stronger, what can make a quarterback in particular sort of feel like there's less pressure, feel like they've nothing to lose. And I think that's one thing that Joe Flacco is doing right now. I think he's playing like he has nothing to lose. We look at Baker Mayfield, he's playing like he doesn't, or at least he feels like he's nothing to lose. And the line for Scott Pioli is that stability matters. And we've seen that from the Buccaneers. I think there is a trust on their quarterback, and they've managed to find a way to take a good hold on the NFC South. We were talking about the NFC South recently as the division that somebody's got to win, because it seems like early on in the season, everybody found new ways to lose it. If we were expecting that whoever was going to end up top of that division would have a losing record. The Buccaneers now have taken control. They're sitting at 8-7. They are on a good run. And we were talking earlier about the Texans losing. All AFC South teams this week lost, which I've definitely put the curse on, by the way. As soon as I started hyping up the AFC South as being a very strong division, something to look out for the future, all 4 teams lost. And it's a 4th loss in a row for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And it's Baker Mayfield who is not attempting too many passes. They're using the run game well. Managed to get 2 touchdowns, 283 yards from 35 attempts. Was making sure that Rachaad White had 20 carries. There is a good balance there in Tampa Bay, and they managed to use that to their advantage to put their Floridian neighbors further down in their spiral.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I mean, this is one of the absolute, stories of the entire season, Shane. I mean, I think Baker Mayfield really has been immensely impressive. 4 straight wins on the bounce after a real blip, and like, by all accounts, right? When you hear the stories coming from within the Buccaneers, it sounds like Baker has grown up a bit, which he needed to do, right? Baker had plenty of talent. The issue with Baker was immaturity, and Baker not realizing that he's not as athletic as he thinks he is in his head, right? But Baker had talent, and Baker has plenty of he's got cojones. He's willing to go out there. He's willing to take shots. He's willing to get hit if needs be, and he's willing to take off. But he has matured, and I suppose I think if you went back to that draft, I think look, Josh Allen would be, or should, the number 1 pick if people could redraft. But Baker went, he went number 1 overall for a reason, right? You don't go without talent, and sometimes maybe you can see the light, and maybe it was the fact that things didn't work out in Cleveland. He then goes to Carolina. He leaves there. He goes over to the Rams, and then ultimately he ends up in Tampa Bay. And maybe it was the realization that was kind of last chance salute. But he has. Yeah, you do have to say that it has been impressive. And the talk now is that the Bucs are looking to get a medium term, a 2 to 3 year deal done, and that Baker is interested in doing that. And I think I certainly felt, that this was probably like the Bucs just kind of trotting out, Baker Mayfield, because who else could they get? And I made plenty of jokes. I'll stick my hand up that the Baker Mayfield Kyle Trask competition reminded me of Trevor Siemian versus Paxton Lynch. But no, the Bucs are they do control the division now. And you would have to say, looking at the division, they have got to go to the Saints, and then they play the Panthers. So they're home to the Saints, and then they're on the road to the Panthers. They're both winnable games. The Saints won't be easy at all. But they have talent. Connor talked about it on the show last week. But the defensive talent that they still have, and they have Mike Evans, and I think there's a conversation to be had there about the GM and the Glazers not getting Mike Evans tied up, because he is absolutely sensational. But when you have what the other thing about Baker's maturity, both as a person, but and I suppose with Evans is he like Evans gives him such a good target, but there are other options as well. You've talked about the way in which they're leaning into the run game. So I think the offense, like the difference between the offense there last year and this year, is night and day. Like they look like a different team, understandably, and I would have to say you'd have to put them as favorites. It means that the Falcons are kind of going to be chasing their tail, but the on the other side, like for the Jags, I mean, it's all gone wrong essentially for them. And I don't know if you saw it, or people kind of watching and listening would have heard, like Trevor Lawrence at the podium just said, "We look lost out there. We have a good week of practice, and then we look lost." That's not that good. That is not what you want to hear in any way, shape, or form. And at the end of November, they had beaten the Texans, and things looked good, right? Okay, they had a bad loss to the 49ers, but the 49ers, are the 49ers. And then they have gone on this, 4-game slide now. And Trevor, it's like everything is on his plate. And he got hurt the other day because they're down, and he's still out there and he's still running. And I don't understand. I thought there was a good piece on the Athletic podcast about, or was it Kevin Clark, talking about, look, ultimately, we all kind of hoped Trevor Lawrence was going to, and the vibes were really good and people liked the Jags, but Trent Baalke is the GM. And they did not do enough. It was right. It was on the Clark podcast, and they outside, Christian Kirk is out, and my goodness, did they miss him. And yeah, they went and they got Ridley, but that was really it. And when you consider the moves that those around them have made, it just isn't enough. And they now find themselves in an absolute dogfight for their division. And they should be so far ahead of the others in their division, Shane, right? The Colts have a rookie head coach and a rookie QB, and they've played the majority of their season with a backup. The Texans, had, were picking at the top of the draft for year after year. Again, they have a rookie head coach, rookie QB. And the Titans are in this transition period, and they are also playing a rookie QB. And yet the Jags, who had everything in place, who came back against the Chargers last season, it looked like they could really push on. And yet all of the teams sit at 8-7. It has to be desperately disappointing for them as a fan, because you should have had a stranglehold on this division, and you don't. And I mean, can they make the playoffs? Oh, absolutely, they can make the playoffs. But you would have to say that with the way that they're playing, it's a huge game against the Panthers coming up. Now, they are at home, and they should win that, and that can help to right the ship. But you would have to have, you would have to have concerns, because the Panthers actually managed to score points. It's on Green Bay the other day, but that's a one to absolutely circle.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't that long ago that we were talking about the Jaguars as a possibility to top the AFC. I know it seemed somewhat far-fetched considering how strong the Ravens in particular were playing. But the last 4 games, I mean, it's quite obvious that everything runs through Trevor Lawrence. We've seen what we've seen in other teams in the league, Cincinnati probably being the best version, is that when you lose your starting quarterback, find a way to work without him, find a way to, whether it's change your system a little bit. When the new quarterback is in, find a way to make it work around him. I think they forced Trevor Lawrence back from his injury on Monday Night Football too quickly, and he's still trying to catch his breath a little bit from limping off what we thought was at the time was a season-ending injury. And look, the Jaguars aren't done yet. There's 3 teams in that division on the same record. The Texans have to play against the Colts. So one of those teams is going to get knocked back. They have to play against the Panthers, who are statistically the worst team in the league, and play against Tennessee, who are a team they know and a team they should be able to defeat. So all hope was not lost yet in the Jaguars. And obviously, to top the division, they have a home game in the first round of the playoffs. But the promise of the season, it just seems to be fading away quite quickly after that injury to Trevor Lawrence. And moving on, we were talking earlier about the Saints in the NFC South. The Saints did on Thursday Night Football succumb to the LA Rams. The LA Rams now are a team who are sitting pretty solidly in the 6th seed. There's 2 NFC West teams in the playoff spots, the Rams in number 6 and the Seahawks in number 7. And what we've seen with the Rams is the fact that I think we all, after last season, it was quite clear that when they won the Super Bowl 2 years ago, that they were effectively mortgaging their future. We expected to be 2 or 3 seasons before they found a way to come back, as good as and all as their head coach was. We saw the Rams head coach, whose name is Sean McVay. We saw him talking. They do a segment on Thursday Night Football where he basically got into the carpool and was talking to the guys, and he was pretty much spelled out how the Rams never let the outside noise think that they could knock down. They were fully believed, and we've seen now that they've won 4 of the last 5 games. The one that they lost being that game where they ran the Ravens incredibly tight in Baltimore, which is not a mean feat. And even though they've lost, that's still quite an impressive showing. I think the Rams are going to be a very, very tricky team by the time we get to these playoffs, and I think they will make the playoffs because even though they have to play in San Francisco on the final game of the season, they have to play against the Giants in New York before that, a game which I believe that they will win. No offense to any Giants fans, I believe that the Rams are just offensively good enough to go in and pretty much put a good early score in. And against the Saints here, a Saints team which, by the way, keeps showing promise of I thought before the season that the Buccaneers were going to be nowhere near the top of the NFC South. That was the Saints division to lose. And they've somehow found a way to lose. Derek Carr not playing as well as Saints, the New Orleans Saints probably thought they would. He threw quite a bad interception against Los Angeles. Had to attempt 40 passes. Their run game hasn't really gotten going at all. I mean, like their best rusher was Alvin Kamara, who had 9 carries for a grand total of 19 yards. That just isn't good enough, especially when you're facing against a team who has the offensive weapons of Matthew Stafford, Kyron Williams, and the stellar Puka Nacua, who has probably been one of the finds of the draft. When I look at when I look at the Rams now, going ahead the rest of the season, I think that's a team who are talented, who have a really good offensive head coach, and we've seen that the offensive head coaches in the modern National Football League is how you build a winning program. And this is a team that we all thought were written off for a couple of years and can still do something. Will they win a Super Bowl? Probably not, but I reckon whoever they come against in the first round of the playoffs, which as it stands is Detroit, but whoever that might be, are going to be run pretty damn close.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I suppose I think you have to have the Rams and Sean McVay in the conversation for Coach of the Year. Now, ultimately, he might not win it, but yeah, I mean, this was a team who were talked about prior to the season as being like kind of bottom feeders. Shane, they were not expected to do anything of no. This was like essentially kind of find the replacement for Stafford. But Stafford is playing QB as well as anyone in the league. He really is. Like, he is playing the stuff he's doing at the moment, the sidearm stuff. He is so confident, and he looks renewed. And this is again, I'm an older guy, matured. I don't know if anyone has seen the video. When someone came up, I can't remember who came up to him the other day and said, "Man, I loved watching you growing up." And Stafford goes over to the coach because I just got the old man treatment. He just told me he enjoyed watching me growing up. And he talked about it himself, I suppose, in the summer, how young the receivers were and finding a ways to connect with them. But he absolutely has. And I mean, I wish the Broncos offense could be even half as explosive as these Rams, because, outside of that absolute egg they laid against the Packers back in early November, the offense has been really, really explosive. And they were running the ball really well, but they're passing it exceptionally well. And yeah, Puka Nacua looks absolutely magic. And in McVay, they have a coach who you can see he has rediscovered the joy. Like last year, Jordan Rodriguez and others have kind of chronicled the kind of mental health struggles that he had. Did he want to continue coaching? But this year, he absolutely looks refreshed. He looks overjoyed. He's enjoying it, and they are having fun. So yeah, you would have to say that poor old Brian's Giants. Brian, I think, has his daughter's birthday today, which is why he can't join us. But I can't imagine next Sunday at 6 o'clock. I can't imagine he's going to sit down expecting a Giants win against this Rams team. And then, yeah, it's obviously the really tough one to have to go on the road into Santa Clara to finish. But they can give anyone a bloody no shit. And I mean, it's probably unfortunate for them in some ways that the 49ers lost last night, because it means that the 49ers are probably going to be really playing for it in week 18. But yeah, I would agree with you wholeheartedly. If the Rams make it into the playoffs that opening weekend, nobody's going to like to play them. And yeah, if it is them against the Lions, my goodness, what a story that would be in terms of McVay and Goff. But I think if Stafford wants to keep playing, and I suppose it depends on the miles on the clock, in terms of he's taken a lot of punishment over the years, and we know that he was really banged up last year. But the way he's playing currently, like if he wants to play next year, you're not worried about looking for his replacement, because he can play as well as anybody, and you just want to continue to put the pieces around him and to rebuild. And they have drafted like really well. All the guys are contributing, and yeah, just a really, really impressive piece from them. The Saints, they continue to disappoint, unfortunately. And like, what is the Saints' identity, and what is it they're trying to do? And once again, it just doesn't seem to be working with Derek Carr. They're there. Look, they have talent, but again, you just wonder who are the Saints supposed to be.
Yeah, I'm sorry for Brian. Listen, who knows? Maybe Tommy Cutlets likes dining on mutton. Who knows? They might find a way to cut apart the Rams, but I probably don't see that happening. Before we talk about the Seahawks, the other NFC West team, who are at the moment the seventh team in that list. So there are only 7 winning teams in the NFC as opposed to 10 in the AFC. Before we talk about those, I think we have to move on to the battle of our sides. The Patriots played the Broncos on Christmas Eve. I'm not quite sure what your opinion are on the white helmets. It seems to be dividing opinion among Broncos Twitter. This is a game which Broncos fans and Broncos needed to win. And this is a game that Patriots fans, half of them probably didn't want us to win. And we still managed to find a way to do it. And I think this is another case where this adds to the conversation around the future of Bill Belichick, because it was quite clear from elements of his, I won't say performance, of the way he's acting on the sideline. He's still hungry for victory. He's still hungry to find ways to win. I mean, the microphones caught the bit of him yelling at the ref, probably roaring at the referees that they didn't give time. Now, I know that stuff probably happens all the time, and it's rare that we manage to get caught in a hot mic like that, which probably amplifies that moment up a little bit more than the kind of stuff we usually see. But it's quite clear that Belichick still has, to use Travis Kelce's words, still has some football after them. In terms of the game, what happened on the field, 3 things. Firstly, I figured that the Patriots would play better because it wasn't in Foxborough. For some reason, the Patriots have with the exception of the win against the Bills, Mac Jones' only properly good performance of the year. They managed to play better away from home than to do at home. Secondly, Bailey Zappi once again put in one good half of football. This time it was the second half, which is somewhat rare. And I think there are question marks now over whether Bailey Zappi is keeping his job, no matter who's in charge of New England next year, whether it's Bill Belichick or otherwise. Is Bailey Zappi keeping his job as the backup for next year? He's not playing good enough to be a starter. I think it's quite clear that the Patriots will go for a quarterback next year. 90% likely they'll draft as opposed to trading for somebody. But considering he's the guy who knows the team, he knows the offense, he seems to be quite liked inside the dressing room by Bill O'Brien in particular. Bill O'Brien, who obviously worked with Mac Jones and had a lot of on sideline sparring matches with Mac Jones, like we saw in Frankfurt, seems to get on a little better with Bailey Zappi. And maybe, who knows, Zappi might have done enough to keep himself around next season as the backup. In terms of the Broncos, though, as much as the Patriots managed to find a way, and Ezekiel Elliott, who I think when he plays well, the Patriots play well, and he was sometimes good, sometimes not. Or the run game in general for New England, sometimes it's good, sometimes not. This is a game that Denver should have won. If you put up 2 quarters in the middle of the game where you score no points, it's very difficult to find ways to come back. You know what happened? I mean, was this the Denver Broncos who turned their season around after the getting their slapped in Miami? Turned their season around was the great Lazarus story of the NFL this season. And it's just come up short, whatever about getting hit by the Detroit Lions, but at home on your own field against the New England Patriots, who are playing with second-rate players and offense in particular. What happened with Denver? How what slowed down the Broncos?
I wonder if some of it was complacency. Shane, I mean, certainly amongst the Broncos fans, I can tell you in some fan groups, people were talking a 40-point win was one of the predictions I saw. I know that people were talking about Hunter Henry being out, and I know Ron, who watches the show, pointed out that Mike Gesicki can do damage. And I've watched the Broncos, for more than 30 years at this point. I know the Broncos have issues dealing with every tight end. So, but that was dismissed. And I wonder if that played a part in it. I think also the struggles in the third quarter. The Broncos have been amongst the worst, if not the worst team in the third quarter of games. And like that was a 20-point swing in that quarter that you saw there. Everything went wrong for the Broncos, the 3 and outs. I watched the game live, and I was saying on the show previously, with Broncos games, I try not to take too much notice of Twitter. But in the middle of Christmas night, in the third quarter, with everything going on, I did have a look, and the calls for Russ to be benched were pretty loud at that point. Now Russ is a better fourth quarter, but I would say, Shane, the Broncos got off to a really poor start, right? But ultimately, when the team looks at this few years and the Russell Wilson years, and there's a 5% chance for the playoffs. So yeah, they could, in theory, they could still make it, right? But ultimately, they traded for Russell Wilson because they believed that they were a quarterback away. They believed in their weapons. Well, the weapons have been pretty poor, to say the least. Then they traded for a head coach. I talked about the Browns earlier, and an awful lot of Broncos fans would say the Broncos are a much better run team, but the Browns will have been potentially to the playoffs twice since the Broncos were last there. Now, there's that huge sword of Damocles that is Deshaun Watson's contract hanging over their heads, but the Broncos have huge decisions to make. And Sean Payton made his feelings clear. He said he was going to be very annoyed if this team didn't make the playoffs. This was before the season started. Well, they've got a 5% chance currently. And so, how many players on offense would other teams take? Like Javonte Williams was a great story. He's trying, but ultimately, how many teams around the league would take him? The Broncos have had an O-line that has been fit for pretty much, they've started every single game, and yet this team consistently struggles to move the ball. And I don't think we're getting the full picture on the Russ-Sean Payton relationship. He doesn't trust him to move the ball, it seems, he only kind of cuts him loose either in the red zone or in the fourth quarter. But there are huge decisions to be made because the Broncos it's not just one more year of Russ. You are signing up to 2 years because of the way the contract is structured. The Broncos have to make a decision by the 5th day of the 2044 season. Do they want Russell Wilson on the team essentially for 24 and 25? But kudos the Patriots in Bill Belichick. They have a wily old fox, and he's got a lot of passion, and he's got a lot of pride too. And if he's not going to be coaching in New England, he wants to prove he can coach. I said that. The defensive side worries me, and the ability to put one over Sean Payton, he was going to enjoy. I'm sure Christmas dinner tasted much better for him because of that. We'll have to see what happens ultimately, in terms of will it be a parting of the ways, and how will it go? But neither team were able to move the ball at all on the ground. Like everything that came through the air, and a lot of it kind of came on chunk plays. The Broncos kept going with these screen passes that never really went anywhere. But yeah, I've seen this before in Denver. I remember a few years ago, the Broncos were flying and they were playing a Giants team who were all at sea, and then Eli Manning rolled in to Mile High and beat the Broncos. So another season ends, I think, probably without the playoffs. The question for Denver is, will they win the last 2 games in order to finish with a winning record, which I do think would help to change the culture. But winning against the Raiders will be an interesting one in that final game of the season. They should be able to beat the Chargers. And then the Russell Wilson question, because if not Russ, there's no easy answer, right? It's huge, but will Sean Payton want 2 more years of this, right? Where you're just about throwing for 200 yards a game generally. Can you really live with that for another 2 years, or do you want to move off it? So those, I think, are the questions for Denver now.
It's been quite an interesting week of NFL action. I guess we can do a quick spring through some of the other talking points flying around. I want to start with the Seattle Seahawks, who, as I mentioned earlier, are occupying that final spot in the playoffs. I was talking to a Seahawks writer a couple of weeks ago who seemed quite disillusioned with the way that Pete Carroll's football was playing, and that was convinced that the Seahawks, this is in the aftermath of their loss to the 49ers now, was convinced that the Seahawks would find some way would pretty much collapse in the tail end of the season. That's not how things have worked out. Now that Geno Smith is back, the Seahawks have managed to find a way to keep chugging on. What has been their downfall throughout the season is the fact that they've lost twice against the Rams and twice against twice against the divisional record, which has held them back. Granted, they beat the Cardinals. They had to play the Cardinals again in the last game of the season, which could be banana skin. I'm sure that those guys in Arizona would have nothing then to make sure that Seattle don't get to the playoffs, and that could be. I believe that game is in Arizona. That could be great motivation for Kyler Murray and co. to try and come out and hit them. But I think this is a reflection on on let's not do it too early kind of ethos that Pete Carroll has built. After the game when had a victory on Monday Night Football against the Eagles, Pete Carroll said it playing in his locker room. Can you win the game in the first quarter? No. In the second quarter? No. Blah, blah, blah. Can you win the fourth quarter? Yes, we can. They managed to find a way to eke past the Eagles 2 weeks ago. They win a 3-point game against the Titans. The Titans, who, by the way, keep finding ways to be in these close battles, and again have found a way to lose at home, which is another question, especially for the Pages' point of view of Mike Vrabel out themselves. Is there enough? They have to play at home to the Steelers this coming weekend and then away to the Cardinals. Those games are winnable. Those games are also can be quite tricky, especially depending on what mood the quarterbacks, whoever that the Pittsburgh or that the Steelers and
I suppose, Shane, from my perspective, I think, yeah, like the game against Steelers is a huge one, but being at home makes all the difference in the world for this. The Steelers, go and do a Mike Tomlin special at the weekend, backs against the wall, but it's two wily foxes going up against one another. I think Pete Carroll in December, they have the bit between their teeth. They are pushing on. I thought they should have enough to get there. I think you win the two and you get in, and I think he will be massively motivated. I think the Broncos probably not making the playoffs will actually motivate Pete Carroll and the Seahawks. Like, the reality is that they, there is bad blood there. He has thrown shade at Russ plenty of times. So I think the fact that they may well make the playoffs or have the possibility of making the playoffs for 2 years after Russ has left and won't have made it, I think that will probably be another motivating factor for them. And yeah, I thought Gino really kind of grew into the game, and I thought he found his rhythm pretty well. Look, the Titans are a well-coached team. They lack talent currently, but I imagine that you will see them address those issues in the off season, as long as Mike Vrabel doesn't head up to New England to take up what could potentially be a vacant seat up there.
And who knows? I'm sure we've a brilliantly long off season to, or not brilliantly long off season, annoyingly long off season to discuss what happens there. I think a couple of other things that caught our eye around the league. Green Bay, a team who again made on a mid-season run, like a lot of teams do, but on the defensive side of the ball, they're not showing playoff caliber level football. They're at 7-8. They're still in the run. Who knows what way things can work out? But if you ship 30 points against Carolina. Granted, they got the win. They won 32-30, but Green Bay still look a year or two short of being a playoff caliber or Super Bowl caliber team again.
Yeah, look, the defense is the issue there. I think offensively they have grown as the season has gone on. This is what they wanted, but I think they have invested heavily in that defense and they believed in it. Now, you could say that they probably should have known better, because this is not the first season. There have been questions around the defensive coordinator, but it's really kind of fallen off a cliff, it feels, over the past few weeks. And yes, he may, Bryce Young just feasted really on the middle of the field the other night. It was his best performance of the season by a country mile. I felt the Packers ultimately had enough, and I think on offense they will continue to grow next year. But yeah, they're going to make a change at the defense coordinator. They shouldn't have gone into it. It must be frustrating, I think, for them, because when you consider if the defense had been even just average, right? I mean, look, with what's on that side of it, with the draft capital, and then you would hope it would be good. But if it had even been average, they probably would be in the playoffs. Instead, it's been bad, and that may well be what cost them. Look, they're in with a chance, but the defensive pieces, it has to be a concern. But when you look at Jordan Love, when you look at the wide receivers, and you look at the offense, and you say, yeah, because again, they've had to deal with O-line issues throughout the season. Hasn't always, progress isn't linear in young QB developments. There have been ups and downs, but overall, I think they'd have to be very pleased with Jordan Love's first season as starter.
And one or two more things that caught our eye, obviously, on Christmas Day. I think that the Eagles may have got some good look back from making their Christmas album from Singing Fairy Tale of New York, as they got a win on Christmas Day against their quarterback midway through the game. Tyrod Taylor throwing a touchdown and an interception. Jalen Hurts throwing a touchdown and an interception, but managed to complete for over 300 yards as the Eagles scored 35 points to the Giants 25, 33 points to the Giants 25. This was a relief moment for the Eagles, a team that really needed to start building momentum, even if they don't get the number one seed, which is still possible now that the 49ers have lost. But even if they don't get the number one seed, winning these last couple of games back of their minds, it's a psychological boost going in, because if you're Philadelphia and you're sitting there, managed to get this done, they have to play at home to the Cardinals and then away to the New York Giants later on. They're sitting here pretty much as favorites for the NFC East after the Cowboys have been knocked down. The Eagles have an easy enough run to the end in comparison to, let's say, the Dolphins have a very difficult run to the end in the AFC East. This is the kind of calm down win that Philadelphia need after what has been a bad stretch, because the Eagles are going to go on and win the Super Bowl, which is still quite possible. Let's not rule it out. There is still some pretty good talent there, and they can always lean on the old tush push. They need to put the stretch of the past few weeks as much in the rearview mirror as possible.
Yeah, look, I mean, they went out and they did what needed to be done. I think what the difference is last year, right? They ran all over the Giants. It was almost record setting in terms of what they did. This year it was through the air. The Giants decided to go with Rod Taylor, kind of that took away the Tommy DeVito era. You have to imagine for the Giants, it's all about next year. I don't know. And I'm not a Giants fan, and maybe I'm a bit more cynical than some, but I think it's got to be difficult to sell Giants fans on Daniel Jones for next year and really make them believe that they can, do things. It will be interesting to see how the Giants approach the off season. And I think there'll definitely be coordinator changes there. For the Eagles, it's about trying to ensure that they win the division, they get the playoffs, and they try to get as healthy as possible. They'll be in with a puncher's chance, but you would have to say that given how they match up with the 49ers, that we've seen that play out. But look, it's any given Sunday in the NFL, the bounce of the ball goes your way, and who knows?
Right, my Stephen's Day dinner bell is calling soon enough, so I guess we'll spin through a couple of quick things that caught our eye. First things first, I just want to not quite shout out the New York Jets. I was sitting down on Christmas Eve and I was watching Red Zone, and the Jets are 27-0 up. I was like, wow. Trevor Siemian in this week's game of quarterback hokey cokey, as you like to say, Colum, is doing an incredible job. I'm going to flick it off. As a tradition in our house, we watch Die Hard, favorite Christmas movie on Christmas Eve. Hans Gruber falls off the top of the Nakatomi Plaza. I flick back on, and the Commanders are winning 28-27. That was an incredible turnaround. Yet the Commanders still managed to find a way to lose. And I think the fact that Sam Howell got taken out of the game after attempting 22 passes and completing just 6 of them, and they put in Jacoby Brissett, I think it's just another reflection on, even though they are not the team with the worst record in the league, and they've shown some good points early on in the season, it's quite clear that those guys need to clear house. I don't know if this is something that maybe caught your eye, or if there's something else that maybe caught your eye a bit more over the Tinsley weekend.
Well, I suppose a couple of things. The Jets are going to run it back. So the reports are that Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh will be back, which ultimately makes sense to me. Saleh's been happy, and Douglas has been a passenger in the Aaron Rodgers story. And I think, Shane, it's about Aaron Rodgers, the player, trying to fix the problems that Aaron Rodgers, the GM, has created. And remember now, like Alan Lazard and his friends came across. Alan Lazard was a healthy scratch at times. But hey, being friends with Aaron Rodgers, he's a good friend. He may be many other things, but he's a good friend. He looks after them. But they need, I'm not surprised to see him, that they're going to decide to run that back because of where they're at. It makes sense. The other thing that jumped out, Breece Hall is a special player. He is a special player. He's absolutely magnificent. The Commanders, I think Ron was trying to say that he could develop a QB. He was trying to save his job. But yeah, we saw it. Jacoby should have been the starter there. Jacoby's proved that he is a more than capable backup. And I hope for Jacoby's sake, and I think an overarching theme here, Shane, is I think you're going to see teams pay a lot more to back up QBs next year, because apparently Trevor Siemian became the 51st QB to win a game this season. 51, and that tying, I think, for either second place or maybe tying for overall. I think 2010 may have had one more, and we still have 2 weeks to go. So I do think you'll see teams invest a lot more into the backup position next year.
51, one for every state and an extra for DC. So natural that Washington had to claim that one. One final thing I think that caught people's eye. We're talking about the AFC South. The Colts managed to. I thought we talked about how they've been incredibly well coached. They have a Gardner Minshew who's been playing strongly, but they come across a Falcons team who every week find a new way to impress us, but every second week find a new way to disappoint us. They managed to get a lot of control early on in the game. They scored in every quarter. Taylor Heinicke had a good game. Bijan Robinson had a good game. Not only as a rushing player, but as a receiving player, they found a new way to use him, and the Colts were made to suffer.
Yeah, I mean, look, for the Falcons, I think it's a season of frustration. What could have been, and ultimately they have kind of been humstrung by their coach Shane. He felt he knew best the whole time. They've been in and out, and on QBs, we haven't really seen Bijan involved in the passing game. They finally do it. The Colts, I thought this was the first game all year where they really looked a little bit lost. I suppose, they are a team under a rookie head coach, but really was the first time they'd looked lost. Bijan, who we have seen flashes, I think it showed that he needs to be more involved in things with the Falcons. I think that will be interesting to see, I suppose, how this plays out over the next couple of weeks, and ultimately the decision that Arthur Blank makes about Arthur Smith's continued tenure as the head coach there.
Well, we've had a fantastic NFL Week 16. Week 17 kicks off with the Cleveland Browns hosting the New York Jets on Thursday Night Football. We have a Saturday night game as the Cowboys host the Detroit Lions, and then a full slate on New Year's Eve Sunday. Colum, thank you very much for joining me. Everybody who's been listening and watching, thank you very much for joining us in the Irish NFL Show. We will be keeping track of all the final things. Things are really heating up now in the tail end of the season. So keep with us.
Yeah, absolutely. We're back tomorrow with the preview show for all the Week 17 action. But yes, and if you enjoy the podcast, please do rate, review, and subscribe. It makes an enormous difference. Enjoy the rest of your St. Stephen's Day, Shane. Good chatting to you about all of the Week 16 action.
Right, we've tucked into the NFL. Time to tuck into some turkey and ham again.